Hello and welcome back to Trash. Is it really burnout after months of rubbing two sticks together and not one spark has appeared? Okay, aside from all the manufactured drama, I don't really have a conclusion to this one. So it's going to be more IKEA-style content creation. You guys can tell me the right answer for once. I mean, let's face it, I get all my opinions on Doctor Who from much smarter people than me anyways. So, you've seen the thumbnail, let's get into it. Over the years, I've come to find that unoriginality is an unhelpful criticism, which is bad news for me because it's a criticism I like to throw all the time at the Chibnall era. We have two options. One, I'm a bad critic. Option 2, there is no right or wrong answer to this question. And I'm a bad critic. Let's start with some definitions. What am I talking about when I say ideas? Am I talking about plots, sci-fi concepts, the themes? Or are we talking about when writers supposedly borrow off their own ideas or borrow from other ideas? One criticism that was leveled at Stephen Moffat as time went on was that he was kinda repeating himself a fair bit. Oh look, the Doctor's going to die again. Oh look, the Doctor meets someone in the different order. Oh look, another computer full of dead people. Now, I kind of both agree and disagree with this. I think it's just what happens when a writer sticks with Doctor Who for so long. And is the reuse of a computer full of dead people from Science in the Library really at the top of anyone's list of grievances with Twice Upon a Time? What I think is slightly more of an issue are the themes that a writer likes to deal with. Every writer, to me, kind of tells the same stories over and over again, because certain ideas and topics are going to interest them. Like Russell would always write about the end of the world, narrative collapse, like human societal decay. Stephen has always told stories about supposedly great men having to learn to become good ones. And I like being able to identify this about my favourite writers. It's one of the kicks I get out of Doctor Who and art in general. What I think can be an issue is, again, if you're with the programme for so long, you can find yourself trotting on ground that you've already better explored in an earlier story. While I don't think either of them is a particularly bad story, I think A Good Man Goes to War deals with the idea of the Doctor should not have an army slightly better, because it actually plays out the ramifications of it, whereas Death in Heaven kind of covers it in monologues and speeches. So in regards to that, I'd say I'm fine with Which Is Familiar being The Curse of Fatal Death Part 3, but writers should always be evolving how they explore the ideas. And Stephen has done this. I would say Dracula was really interesting because it took the typical Moffat protagonist but made him the villain. Though to be honest, I think Rob Shearman had the right idea about it. Just write a few great stories and then bail while everyone still loves you. You can make a case either way that Stephen and Russell kinda ended up repeating themselves or just not finding new insights on the particular topic just after a while. Because I think it is fair to say that Russell's exploration of narrative collapse in the finales did start to get a little repetitive, and he could only escalate it so far. What I think works less is the remake of classic Who serials. You know what I'm talking about. Dalek's Master Plan becomes Frontier in Space and Planet of the Daleks. Jess, do you have anything to say on the subject? I'm trying to start a dialogue here. Stu Bagfull kind of talked about this in his review of Destiny of the Daleks. It makes total sense why they did this back in the day, because TV back then was designed to just go out once, never to be seen again. If you wanted to revisit it, you had to pick up a novel. But then, obviously, we got home media, we got videos, DVDs, binging. As such, there's less of a reason to remake stories now. Which is bad news for quite a few Dalek stories written by Terry Nation. Yeah, the guy had a tendency to repeat himself quite a bit. It makes sense, he could get away with it back then, but now he can't. But what about when New Who recreates classic stories? This is where I think Chris Chibnall's Silurian Parter is a good thing to bring up, because it really does what it should do. It updates the story. It fixes quite a few of the flaws with it at the time. But the problem is, the Silurians was more standing out TV in the 70s than Hungry Earth and Cold Blood was back in 2010. So remaking a classic, even when you update it and you do all the things you should do, just ends up having diminishing returns. The original exists, and despite all its flaws, it is iconic. And this is a disagreement I often have with people who prefer Classic Who to New Who. They often say they want the new series to be a bit more like the classic series, but every time the new series has kind of tried that, it hasn't quite worked. Alright, here's the closest thing I have to a conclusion. Here's a definite no-no. I think the biggest pitfall with reusing ideas is understanding why they worked at the time. If a writer doesn't seem to have that, I think that's the biggest hurdle rather than the ideas themselves. And for my go-to example of this is, well, Series 12. Now, before I rip into this, I'm trying to say nicer things about the Chibnall era these days, so I will point out one great reuse of an idea, and that's the reveal of the Dewan Master. It's not handled perfectly. I don't think the foreshadowing was as solid as it could be, and the I thought you were bad at running thing, that's very sloppily handled. But one thing that's a great idea on paper is taking the Master reveal, which was usually done at the end of a series, around the first part of a two-parter, or right before the finale, and it moves it to the start of the series, right at the end of the first episode. That understands the expectations an audience is going to be dealing with, and it uses it to catch them off guard. It's actually a really solid move. But then we get the destruction of Gallifrey, and you could argue that we weren't really getting anything out of Gallifrey already existing anymore. Hellbent wasn't that interested in it. The Doctor only seems to care about the people when they're blown up. So I kind of get it. But there's just a lot of problems that come with it. First off, Gallifrey being destroyed was a metaphor for the show being cancelled back in the old days, so what are you trying to tell us there, Chris? And second, Gallifrey being gone really mattered to people who started with Series 1 because it was part of the Doctor's backstory. It kind of came with the character. Whereas we've had Whittaker for a whole series, and this is meant to cause a massive shift in her character in the second one, but we knew nothing about her connection to Gallifrey. We don't really know how much she cared about her. Yeah, we can obviously understand that it's a loss for her, but that loss isn't necessarily going to mean anything for the audience because we've not really seen her and Gallifrey together at all. There was no state of grace. And it's hard to do Last of the Time Lords-esque angst when there are Time Lords still running around. This is why the Master coming back in the RTD era was a big deal, because it changed how we knew how the show worked. Russell was very careful to make it clear that he was the last. Time lock on Gallifrey, there's no others. And at this point, we've already seen this arc done better. We already know where it's going to go. We've already seen its conclusion, so why are we seeing it again? This is the kind of thing we mean when we criticize the Chibnall era for trading in with RTD era iconography, because it lacks what made it work before. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why Moffat brought Gallifrey back, apart from he didn't want a childhood hero to become a killer of children. The last time we got anything interesting out of the Doctor being the last of their kind was the Doctor's wife. So if we're not getting a metaphor out of Gallifrey being gone, we're getting the arc that we had before, but less good, and we've already experienced it. There are less story opportunities to explore with the Doctor being the last of their kind. Why do this? Is this really an idea that can work again? And that brings us to fanservice. This is kind of the biggest pitfall with fanservice, because when you bring back ideas, plots, iconography, these things aren't being brought back for the purposes they had back then. They're being brought back because they were here before. So they can't work as they were intended to because they're being done for different reasons. The Doctor isn't the last of their kind anymore because they have an interesting arc to explore with becoming closer to the human race. There's no meta-commentary on the inherited mythology of the old show. It's here because that's how things were done back then. So, there, we did it. We got a message out of it in the end. Please do let me know whether I'm right about any of this, whether you have a completely different opinion. I would love to hear it. Drop it down in the comments. Just let me know what you think. Share it around. Let's discuss this, please. Like, subscribe. Fuck it, you know what to do.